Welcome! I'm looking forward to working with you to deepen our understanding of leadership. I'm being sincere, too, when I say deepen our understanding. The interactions in this class always help me see something from a new perspective or lead me to investigate something I hadn't thought about, so it adds to my understanding as well as yours. It can be a challenge to define leadership. Our first discussion will explore that and help us think about why. That said, there tend to be some common themes, and Northouse combines them nicely in this definition. The words I highlighted in red are the common themes and also reflect the topics we'll focus on in this class. Thinking about leadership as a group process focused on a goal can create a lot of questions. In psychology, we approach those questions by thinking about the mental states and the behaviors involved. The definition of psychology of leadership from one of our books frames the topic from the perspective of the followers. Other approaches emphasize the individual in the role of the leader. Either way, we use empirical evidence, in other words, scientific research, to think about what we know. One way to organize knowledge is to think about how or why a person becomes a leader and what's included in effective leadership. The fancy term for how or why a person becomes a leader is emergence. In some cases, we can differentiate between situations where everyone in the group has an opportunity to become a leader and one member emerges as a leader. We'll focus on situations like that in class, while also thinking about situations where the role of a leader is associated with a job title, situations sometimes referred to as assigned leadership. As I mentioned, we can organize our knowledge in terms of the process becoming a leader, but also in terms of the knowledge of what's involved in effective leadership. The most simple way of thinking about effectiveness is by asking how a leader helps the group achieve its goal. As I mentioned, that's a simple way. It can be complicated to define. Researchers consider effectiveness in terms of objective measures like sales or profit or the number of people helped, and they also consider it in terms of the more subjective measures of group members' experience. The new psychology of leadership provides a few terms that can be helpful in talking about effectiveness and thinking about the different ways it can be defined. The difference between demonstrated leadership and impactful leadership is a bit like the differences in research approaches I just mentioned. They also add the idea of effective leadership, which I tend to think of as being a little bit more dramatic than just achieving the goal. The term good leadership also highlights the idea that not all of the goals or achievements are positive. So you might have noticed the image of the elephant I've been using in these slides and wondered why I'm using the elephant. As I was putting together the materials for class, I kept trying to think of a metaphor or a story to help describe how the topics in this class fit together. At one point, I remembered an Indian folk tale I'd heard about blind men and an elephant. There are a few versions of that story, but it goes something like this. Long ago, 6 blind men lived in a village in India. Since the blind men could not see the world for themselves, they had to imagine. They listened carefully to the stories told by travelers to learn what they could about life outside the village. The men were curious about many of the stories they heard, but they were most curious about elephants. They were told that elephants could trample forests, carry huge burdens, and frighten young and old with their loud trumpet calls. But they also knew the king's daughter rode an elephant when she traveled in her father's kingdom. Would the king let his daughter get near a dangerous creature? The old men argued day and night about elephants. Finally, the villagers grew tired of all the arguments, and they arranged for one of the elephants from the palace to visit the village. The men stepped forward to touch the creature. It was a subject of so many arguments. The first blind man reached out and touched the side of the huge animal. An elephant is solid like a wall, he declared. It must be very powerful. The second man put his hand on the elephant's trunk. An elephant's like a giant snake, he announced. The third man felt the elephant's pointed tusk. I was right, he decided. This creature is as sharp and as deadly as a spear. The fourth man touched one of the elephant's 4 legs. What we have here, he said, is an extremely large cow. The fifth man felt the elephant's giant ear. I believe an elephant is like a huge fan or maybe a magic carpet that can fly over mountains and treetops, he said. The sixth blind man gave a tug on the elephant's coarse tail. Why, this is nothing more than a piece of old rope. Dangerous indeed, he scoffed. I remembered the story as being about how we interpret the information we have and how we understand things very differently depending on the perspective we can take. Those are important points to keep in mind as we study leadership. There are numerous perspectives, each influenced by the situation and the approach to knowing. When I went to look up the story, I discovered it's also used to make several points about how we can reconcile differences in perspectives, with different endings to the story depending on the point being made. That fits, though, with the topic of this class. It can be hard to figure out how to make sense of all of the approaches. Sometimes the elephant story ends with someone telling the man what an elephant is, but it's a little tricky to do that with leadership. Good news is we don't need to pick just one perspective. We'll just need to wrap our head around all of the different, or a few of the different ones. So, how are we going to learn about those different perspectives? We'll use 4 components to help you learn about the topics in each weekly module. Each of the modules is going to include a page called Goals, Readings, and Other Resources. The goals can help you focus throughout the module. Then, there's going to be a video like this one in there that explains how the ideas fit together. There also is going to be information about which sections of the text will provide information, and probably some other resources. The activities, the second part, will take different forms, but the idea is to help guide you to read parts of the material in more detail and make note of those details as they relate to the goals for the class. These activities might take the place of your typical note-taking method and are intended to help inform other assignments. I know assignments like this are sometimes viewed as busy work, but they are sincerely intended to help you learn. I know none of us needs anything more to do. Research related to learning and cognition indicates the timing and the thinking you'll need for these assignments will help you in the long term. The quizzes, another component, build on those activities by helping you note specific terms and concepts that are important to know. Research suggests they'll also help you remember those terms and concepts over time. So those questions are about things that can add to your ability to understand more than just information in the module. Discussions will help you bring together the information from the activities and quizzes in a little bit different way. They'll include an activity or a reading for you to write about and give you the opportunity to see your colleague's perspective. A couple of notes about the reading. As far as the books themselves, I'm still trying to find the ideal textbook for this class. The Northhouse book I mentioned in the previous slides would be great if we were just studying theory, but that's a different focus than the Psychology of Leadership. The new Psychology of Leadership book we're using has some important information, but it's not written as a textbook. So I'm trying something a little different and also supplementing from the Group Dynamics book. It is the same book we use for the Groups and Teams class, so it might look familiar, but we're going to be using it in a different way. That said, I encourage you to be strategic in your reading. You rarely need to understand every detail from every reading in any situation. The course overview includes information about skimming, scanning, and intensive reading. I suggest you skim all of the readings to get a very general idea about what's included. As I mentioned, the activities and quizzes will help you know what you need to know so you can use scanning to locate that information and only intensively read as you need to. The activities, quizzes, and discussions will help you learn, and they're structured with that in mind. Activities and discussions are graded based on engagement, not accuracy. You can take the quizzes twice. You can use the feedback from each of those assignments to gauge your progress and decide where you need to review or request clarification. Then, the exams help me determine what you know. In other words, they help me determine whether you achieve the related goal for the class. They're structured a little differently, and the timing on the multiple choice is a little shorter, and you only have one attempt. The open-ended questions will be graded based on thorough demonstration of accurate understanding. It was a little tricky to figure out the pace of this class for the 8-week session, and I ended up deciding to make it a slight bit less intense initially while we figured out the routines. It makes it a little bit more intense later, but you're going to be able to work ahead if you'd like. Similarly, the end of the June session officially ends July 3rd, but I have a little more flexibility in entering the summer grades, so I decided to extend the deadline a bit for those who want to use that time. Everything's going to be available so you can finish by July 3rd if you prefer. I also made the exams due the same day as the quiz and activity for a new module. My hope is that the exams won't be overly time-consuming, and they'll be available so you can work ahead. In some cases, a module has a related open-ended question, so you could draft your response as you're finishing the discussion responses for the module.